Okay, this will be video 2 for APUSH on March 18th. So after the Spirit of Geneva broke out, we begin to see the first thaw, T-H-A-W, in the Cold War. And then in 1956, the Soviets finally pick a new sole leader, which will be the new premier, Nikita Khrushchev, which you see right here, the bald head. So Nikita Khrushchev comes out and actually tries to kind of be anti-Stalin. He denounces a lot of the crimes of Stalin, a lot of the oppression he did, a lot of the killings he did that were unnecessary. He also said that this fight within the United States was also unnecessary, that this arms race and constant back and forth with America was unnecessary as well too. So instead, he calls for a peaceful coexistence between America and the Soviets. He calls for a peaceful coexistence. Basically, he thought, okay, he still wants communism to win, but he thought they weren't going to win by like invading countries or killing people or whatever the case is. He thought, let's let both countries, capitalist countries and communist countries, develop technology and science and militaries and see how they treat their people, and then let countries decide which side they'd rather join. And that's kind of his outlook with peaceful coexistence. Some of this, so it did help to increase the thaw, but some of this was kind of diminished by the Hungarian revolt the very next year, or the very same year in '56. So Cold War tensions were relaxing in Eastern Europe, and that led to some of those people in Eastern Europe thinking this was the time to try to break off and demand reform. So in October of 1956, a popular uprising took place in Hungary and overthrew their communist government. So here you have the government overthrown in Eastern Europe. So the question is, will the Soviets intervene here? And the other question is, will America step in and like basically, okay, now you're not communist technically, we're going to jump in and help protect you. But that does not happen. The Soviets will immediately send in troops to crush this rebellion in Hungary. America takes no action as a result, too. So even though Dulles had spent years talking about this idea of intervening in Eastern Europe, this was his chance to do so, and we don't. So as a result, we know Dulles will no longer talk about liberating Eastern Europe, and this will also show America recognizes that Eastern Europe is by de facto a Soviet sphere of influence that we're not going to get involved in. So Hungary had a chance with Khrushchev taking over, but Khrushchev crushes this rebellion and shows that he's not going to give up these territories that easily. And so that thaw in the Cold War kind of ends because obviously he's not going to let countries break off like from Eastern Europe. Then you have Sputnik launching in 1957. This was a moment that kind of caught a lot of Americans off guard. We were not really working that fast towards the space program. We weren't really using rockets yet. We were still using high altitude planes. But a lot of us get caught off guard in October of '57 when the Soviets launched the first man-made rocket and the first man-made satellite into space called Sputnik 1. Now a lot of people nationally and internationally question America's leadership and technology. Were we really leaders anymore? Because now it appears the Soviets have beaten us. So the U.S. quickly tries to catch up and not fall behind the Soviets in the space race. Some blame schools for inadequate training and teaching. So this results in several things. Number one, obviously NASA. NASA develops the National Aeronautical and Space Administration, which is going to try to start bringing in our best scientists from the military and best researchers from like scientific research labs and government programs and the military to work together to basically create a space program, launching rockets to try to keep up with the Soviets. So this is going to start. So that's one of the things that happens is that Sputnik's launch and starts the space race, where now we're going to create NASA and try to make our own rockets to catch up. Another big impact of Sputnik was that Congress in 1958 passes the National Defense and Education Act. The National Defense and Education Act. This will authorize millions in federal money for science and foreign language education. So this is going to help spend federal dollars for schools to start doing better science, math, and foreign language programs to help catch up to the Russians and try to do better in general. So anyway, that's the overall impact of the National Defense and Education Act. So billions will now be spent on the space race, and just know this, that the space race starts here in '57. The first man will not go into space until 1961, but we're going to be losing to the Soviets in the space race for the next several years. Like, the only thing we really beat them in is landing on the moon. They never get to the moon, but we do. But they put the first satellite in space, the first animal in space. They put the first person, the first woman. They're the first to orbit the planet. They do all these firsts before we do. So we're constantly chasing them. They're never able to get all the way to the moon during this time period. So anyway, so this sparked also a lot of other fears that this could lead to nuclear war a lot easier, because now you could take one of these rockets and strap a nuclear bomb to the rocket itself, which is another fear as well too. So that was a big fear as well. All right, then you have, so that's going to be a big cause for concern moving forward. Then you have the Second Berlin Crisis. With new confidence of Sputnik and the fact that they're becoming technologically leaders in general, Khrushchev pushed the whole Berlin issue again and tried to take over the entire city in 1958 by giving Western troops 6 months to leave. Of course, Eisenhower and Western troops refused to do so, and so it actually sparked Eisenhower and Khrushchev to come back together again in 1959. The two of them met at Camp David in Maryland, and they agreed to end the crisis and revisit the issue again in 1960 as far as what to do about Berlin and other issues they're facing. So now, just like you have the spirit of Camp David, you have the spirit of, you had the spirit of Geneva before, now you have the spirit of Camp David. So then you have the U-2 incident. Which is going to, things have kind of getting better with us and the Soviets with Khrushchev. He was more willing to work with us and do peaceful coexistence. But then things get tense again after the U-2 incident in 1960. So 2 weeks before the planned summit took place, the Soviets shot down one of our spy planes called a U-2 spy plane. This spy plane was designed to fly at high altitudes and only take photographs. So it didn't have any kind of, guns on board or missiles or anything. Just a high-flying jet that took photographs, and that's it. So back in Geneva, we asked them, hey, do you want an open skies policy? Can we take photographs of each other? And they said no. Well, we just decided to do it anyway. So since 1955, America had been spying on the Soviets with our high planes. Over time, the Soviets realized what was happening, but they could never prove it. The press in America knew what was happening too, but didn't say much about it in general. So Eisenhower was like, listen, okay, things are getting better with us and the Soviets. We're about to have this other summit meeting here in 1960. Let's just go ahead and stop and do this last one. This will be the last one, no more, because we want to have a better relationship with the Soviets. And so the last one they send on May 1st, 1960, gets shot down by Soviet missiles. So the pilot survived, Francis Gary Powers. He survives, ends up getting imprisoned into Soviet jail. We deny all this at first. We denied we were spying on them until they produced the evidence of the plane being shot down and the pilot. And so Eisenhower refuses to apologize for doing the program. We admit to doing it, but we refuse to apologize. And so Khrushchev calls off the summit, and then things just get re-intensified again as a result of us going into this conflict with the Soviets. So all that relaxation of the past few years all goes up in smoke with the U-2 crisis in 1960, right as Eisenhower's beginning to leave for office. All right, so just a little bit more on communism in Cuba, then we'll stop for the day. So one other cause for concern is in our backyard, which was Cuba. Cuba had a dictatorship for a while now, but we didn't really care because they were pro-U.S. Americans lived there, operated and owned property there, so we were fine with all that. So in 1959, the dictator that was there, Fulgencio Batista, was overthrown by a guy named Fidel Castro. At first, we weren't that concerned because we were like, okay, one dictator or the other doesn't really matter. And so we didn't really bother much with Cuba whenever this went down. But not long after Castro takes over, he begins to seize property, nationalize land, including American property in Cuba. And so when he began to nationalize American-owned business and properties in Cuba, we cut off their trade with them. So America under Eisenhower puts an embargo on Cuba with Castro, and we cut off trade with them in general. Castro then turns to the Soviets for help and helped to develop Cuba into a stronger communist state. As a direct result, thousands of refugees begin to leave Cuba and come to America, mainly Florida, and try to get out of Castro's regime. So Eisenhower plans to do the same thing that he did with Iran and Guatemala, where he's going to send in CIA agents to help overthrow the government. But this will not be able to be ready in time until he's out of office, until JFK's in office. So we'll talk about that more later on. But basically, you're going to see thousands of refugees begin to come to America after the Castro regime takes over and begins to make the place communist. So we're going to stop video 2 there. We'll resume tomorrow. Y'all have a good day. Keep on keeping on.